Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Patriot Show. I am your host, Anthony Stephen Malone. Today, I have a special guest on the show, Franc Milburn, veteran paratrooper and former military intelligence officer, now a security specialist on Iran, Iraq, and Hezbollah organization. Hello, Frank. How are you doing?
Hey, Ant. Good to see you again, mate.
Good to see you again, mate, as well. Thank you for coming on camera
Thank you.
again on this one. Right, Frank, for people who don't know you, can you give them a very brief overview?
Yeah, sure. I've got a military intelligence background from the UK. I spent time in Iraq supporting the US Department of Defense and the State Department as a security specialist. So I worked very closely with both and the US military. I then spent 3 years in the Kurdistan region of Iraq as a oil and gas country security manager. And since then, I've basically worked again with elements of the US government. Like I've done an open source intel project on Syria. I've carried out research on Iran and proxies as well. And I've also, in the kind of academic world, I've written about Iran, Hezbollah, and other proxies for the Institute for National Security Studies at Tel Aviv University, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar Ilan University, and also I've written about Iran's Kurds and their insurgency for the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. I was also a head of political risk at a sort of boutique political risk and security consulting firm in Mayfair in London, and we were then looking at Iran sanctions and advising clients on doing business or not doing business with Iran, as the case may be. So that's me in a kind of nutshell.
In a nutshell, all right. Well, within that very small nutshell is a lot of experience. You're not just writing or talking about things from a academic point of view, which you can do to a very high standard. You've actually been boots on the ground. You've walked the areas. You've been there. You know how it actually is there. So I just wanted me viewers to be aware of just how much experience you actually have as well. What we're going to do today on this show, it's a bit unusual one. Hezbollah and Iran is all over the news at the moment. Frank has come on to speak about the Hezbollah organization and its connections to Iran as well. So, all right, Frank, I'll let you explain this one.
Sure. I mean, what would you like first, Dan? Sort of a quick overview of Hezbollah.
Yeah, quick overview of Hezbollah. So some of me viewers might not realise the
Okay.
history, where they are, what their affiliations are as well. And this is very important because Hezbollah isn't just a terrorist organization, it's a criminal organization that spans worldwide. So the criminal and the terrorism have now combined. That's a very important point.
Okay.
Right, Frank?
Yeah. Hezbollah basically started. They broke away from this organization that was called the Amal militia, which was a Syrian-backed militia that had fought in the Lebanese civil war. Um, Initially, they broke away as some, like some of these organizations do. You get them like a more radical kind of group within the group that wants to break away. So that's what happened. Initially, they were called Islamic Amal, I believe, and then later became Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Very quickly, they started receiving support from revolutionary Iran within Lebanon. Okay, so their support base within Lebanon is Shia, and usually sort of the poor kind of disenfranchised Shia. They picked up early support from Iran, and they became because they were very militant and anti-American and anti-Israeli. Their initial sort of manifesto, 1985, was basically to destroy Israel, expel sort of Western influences from Lebanon and the wider Middle East, and also to combat Shia, anti-Shia elements within Lebanon, particularly the Christian Phalange Party. Yeah. And now this is where it gets like interesting, because they said, right, the people of Lebanon should have the ability to choose their own way, but so long as it's got like kind of like Islamist characteristics. So they received early support from Iran, and they carried out kind of terrorist outrages like the attack on the American embassy, and also the Beirut base bombing, yeah, which killed large numbers of Americans and French.
Yeah.
They also then engaged in kidnapping former CIA head of station there, and also a former a Marine lieutenant colonel who was actually working for the United Nations observers at that time. So they carried out those kind of outrages, and very very quickly they have you seen the the movie Predator, the Blaine character, and he uses that expression, dug in deeper than an Alabama tick. That's basically how Hezbollah evolved in Lebanon. So, and they basically, by the early 1990s, they transformed from a sort of a non-state revolutionary, a non-state violent revolutionary group into a hybrid state actor. Yeah, so they were using political means, social means, and violent means to achieve their goals. Now, on top of that, they've also kind of like morphed into this sort of like a very, very large and powerful international terrorist organization, and also a transnational criminal actor, which is heavily involved in the drugs trade, for example, and in all types of illicit activities from North America, South America, Middle East, Asia. They moved very, very quickly. They're one of the areas, for example, where they're very active is in the what's called in the tri-border area between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, in Ciudad del Este. Okay, and we can talk more about their sort of drug dealing activities and illicit activities.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of how they connect with Iran, they basically now, I mean, they've become very, very powerful in their own right. So they work as a proxy terror and intelligence actor for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Force, Quds Force, and for Iranian intelligence. They assist in smuggling activities right across the Middle East. So whether that's from Iran, weapons, chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, rockets, from Iran right across the land bridge through Iraq into Syria and into Lebanon, and also they smuggle the other way. They've also become so successful in their international smuggling efforts that although they get their big ticket items like rockets, they're big ticket items they've received directly from the Assad regime and also from Iran. But Hezbollah in its own right have become so successful that they've actually helped Iran circumnavigate sanctions to gain, for example, parts for aircraft that have been prescribed under international sanctions regimes. So that's how important they are that they've become to Iran. And also during Iran sanctions, they've become very, very important to Iran in terms of by 2008, the DEA estimated that Hezbollah were involved in about $1 billion worth of illicit activities around the world. Yeah, $1 billion worth. So that's how important they've become to Iran in that respect. They also are heavily involved in the training of proxies for Iran. I mean, they work as basically as an extended arm of the IRGC, QF. So they've trained all kinds of Iraqi clones like Asaib al-Haq, Khatib, Hezbollah, and a number of other Iraqi clones, because in the Iraqi sort of militia universe, the ones that are loyal to Iran, you've got the kind of like the lower level ones who are like the real cannon fodder, and then you've got the kind of more specialist ones who are more sophisticated with rockets, with UAVs, with intelligence, and these are the ones that have been involved in attacks on American and coalition and Iraqi forces right during the American occupation of Iraq. These are the ones that Hezbollah has actually taken to be trained in Lebanon. These are the ones that have been fought under Hezbollah command in Syria, which I'll come into a second. And also as well, Hezbollah have also been involved in training the Houthis in Yemen. So they train proxies for the IRGC QF, for the Iranian intelligence organization, and for IRGC intelligence, and they provide a degree of plausible deniability for Tehran. I've talked about the funds that we can go on to talk more about that. They've also propped up the Assad regime. The Assad regime, very, very important. It's traditional ally of both Hezbollah and for Iran, and very, very important to make sure that Iran has unimpeded access to Hezbollah in Lebanon and in the new Golan front that Hezbollah has opened. So very important. Hezbollah now actually sits astride the Syrian-Lebanese border. Ostensibly it's under control of the Lebanese armed forces, but it's not. Hezbollah controls it. So they basically control that, just as the IRGC and Shia and Iraqi Shia militias sit astride the Syrian-Iraq border. That allows unimpeded access for all kinds of weapons and materiel to pass from Iran through Iraq and into Syria by road.
I'm just going to jump
Hezbollah.
quickly because a lot of the viewers will be thinking that's Hezbollah, Middle East problem, not our problem. What's all the hubbub about? Not many people realize this, but there was a Hezbollah suicide bombing cell, car bombing cell, that was discovered in England, the United
Yeah.
Kingdom. They had three one-ton car bombs that they were about to set off in the United Kingdom. The reason why they were discovered was the Israeli intelligence tipped off British intelligence of what was about to happen. So the worst attack, terrorist attack in British history, was basically it didn't happen because of the Israelis intervening. So Hezbollah is a problem for everybody. Hezbollah's criminal organization and their networks are in the United Kingdom as well. They're very strong here as well as across Europe. So, and the smuggling of human trafficking and children is also a very important part of what Hezbollah do throughout the United Kingdom. They make hundreds of millions a year off it. So this isn't little potatoes. And a lot of that money is sent back to Lebanon to finance international terrorism. A Hezbollah cell smuggling operation, North Carolina in America, was also found and it was stopped. And it was discovered that also that smuggling cell was sending money back to Lebanon and also funding international terrorism. So Hezbollah is a problem now for a lot of organizations. I just wanted to put that one in there, Frank, so people realize that Hezbollah isn't just in Lebanon or in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. It's
No,
actually it's
absolutely.
a global problem now. Go on,
Yeah.
mate. You can
Yeah, no, I was going to say to add to what you were saying, before I finish ticking off what their sort of relationship with Iran. I mean, yeah, you had 2018. There were Hezbollah members arrested in France and convicted in France of being involved in illicit activities and using that to send weapons to Syria. And then you had the terrorist outrage in Bulgaria where Hezbollah killed Israeli tourists, right, in
yeah,
Bulgaria, and that sort of ties into they act as a proxy terror and intelligence actor for the IRGC. So if the IRGC QF, that's the Special Forces kind of paramilitary, the Special Forces special kind of operations unit of Iran, when they want to do, for example, close target reconnaissance of an American embassy or an Israeli embassy, they will use Hezbollah. And
yeah,
this happened in Argentina. Yeah, they attacked. In the early 90s, they attacked They bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. They attacked a Jewish community center as well. And that was Hezbollah basically acting on the orders, on the behest of the IGC and of Iran. Um, so yes, they are a problem globally, worldwide. The DEA launched a sort of a multi-task force operation in 2008. It was called Project Cassandra, and there was a big Politico expose of that in 2017. And basically, the Drug Enforcement Administration, they amassed evidence that Hezbollah had transformed from the Middle East sort of focused military and political organization into a transnational crime syndicate. That some of them that they believed was collecting $1 billion a year from drug and weapons trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities.
yeah.
And the Politico article, actually, it's worth a look at. I've just got it here. It is. I'll just dig that
I
out.
think the viewers will understand now that Hezbollah is a global criminal and terrorist organization. We're just giving everyone a little bit of an insight about them because of events as they are unfolding in
Yeah.
the Middle East at this moment in time.
Yeah, I'll send you the link for that one, Ant, and you can post it below.
Yeah,
Um,
spot on.
but that whole Project Cassandra is very, very interesting because what they do, they give a diagram as well, and they show all the money flows, they show the drug flows, they show all the other activities like laundering of the money, and then using it to buy used cars in America, and then selling these in West Africa. So it's very, very interesting, and it breaks down all the different kind of illicit activities by region. So I'll send you the link for that. Um, but
Yeah,
just to go
your
back,
viewers will find that very interesting. I'm just going to inject one little thing there.
sure.
one of the gentlemen who helped to run Project Cassandra is coming on. Well, we already have an interview
Excellent,
pre-recorded anyway. So when the time's right, we will release an interview as well.
excellent.
Okay.
So yeah, and the other sort of, the kind of strategic utility that Hezbollah has for Iran is because they've got about 150,000, like, different kinds of missile and rocket, yeah. And they estimate now the Iranians are trying to um, enable the Hezbollah rocket forces with precision guided, GPS guided munitions, right? So they say they've got, like, say, maybe 3 dozen of these. Well, that doesn't sound too much, you think, but if you load those up with a chemical warhead or something dirty, right, then you can aim that at Israel. You can aim that at the Dimona nuclear plant. You can aim that at major Israeli population centers, at military bases, and it kind of changes, like, the whole equation. And that leads into their strategic utility to Iran, which is basically to act as a strategic deterrent to stop Israel or America attacking Iranian WMD facilities. That's, biological, chemical, or nuclear facilities in Iran. Because if they do, then Hezbollah can basically unleash hell with these 150,000 projectiles.
Yeah.
Okay, and Hezbollah is dug in. They all their firing positions, their rocket firing positions, their rocket factories, their munitions depots, they're all basically built in and underneath, urban infrastructure, rural infrastructure with civilians above them. So if Israel does unleash hell on them in return, then Hezbollah can turn around and say, well, look at the Israelis, they've killed, like, thousands and thousands of Lebanese civilians. And that's the other thing that people forget about Hezbollah, is that they are totally willing to sacrifice their own people to achieve their objectives and to achieve Iran's objectives.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
So
One of the storage facilities of Hezbollah. We're not breaking any OPSEC. This is actually out there. One of the rocket storage facilities was actually tunneled underneath a hospital as well. So that just speaks for volumes. Hezbollah are not really interested or bothered about
yeah,
collateral damage. So they're trying to hide under population centers to protect themselves. So yeah,
yeah.
okay.
The other area where Hezbollah was of massive utility for Iran was when the civil war broke out in 2011 in Syria. Okay, and Assad was really on the ropes. Hezbollah went in. Some estimates say that there were up to 7,000 Hezbollah, operatives at a time. Now, they were considered to be, some of the most professional operators and experienced operators in Syria. Yeah, they brought their knowledge of, sort of rural and urban insurgency against the Israelis, and they brought that knowledge to operating against the Sunni, the radical Sunni, and the nationalist Sunni enemies of the Assad regime. But in many cases, Hezbollah actually took over leadership of Syrian Arab army units because they were professional, and
Yeah.
also as well they trained up legions of Shia militia, well, so-called volunteers from Pakistan, yeah, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, yeah, and also volunteers, militias that were raised in Syria itself, so that under Hezbollah and Iranian leadership, this gave Iran a hell of a lot of leverage against the Assad regime by having alternate sources of military force available that weren't strictly under the purview of the Assad regime.
Yeah,
So
it's important as well. I think people should realize that the people who are behind Hezbollah, particularly the military side of things, their commanders, the Russian Spetsnaz have been seen in some of the Hezbollah training camps as well. So obviously they're getting trained from the Iranian Quds forces and the Hezbollah themselves as well. Well, I was in the Bekaa Valley when I was inside one of the Hezbollah networks. We actually physically saw Russian military advisors training members of Hezbollah. So this you've got a lot of elements that are helping this little terrorist organization that suddenly over the space of 10 years, 20 years is when bang, they're now a big organization, highly motivated, well trained, well resourceful. Just wanted to make that point there. Hand back to you, Frank.
yeah, so also as well the Hezbollah, they took advantage of that situation in Syria to basically carve out for themselves like zones of influence. So now, like as we said before, as we discussed, they sit astride the Lebanese Syrian border, so that now, you know, any rockets, missiles that the Assad regime wants to transfer to from its own stocks
Yeah.
to Hezbollah can pass freely across the border. Anything the Iranians want to pass to Hezbollah can pass freely across the border. I say freely because obviously they're subject to Israeli interdiction,
Yeah.
and the Israelis have been heavily involved doing that. But basically, the land route, as far as control of the ground, they sit astride the border to make sure that there's two-way smuggling of these items. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
and
it's,
they've
it's
also
important.
they yeah, they've also taken advantage of their incursion into Lebanon and their intervention there on behalf of Assad to basically carve out for themselves a zone in the Golan Heights, basically a second front against Israel. So now Israel is facing two fronts in the north. It's got southern Lebanon and now the Golan Heights. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's starting. So you can see in the Middle East, especially these places, starting to escalate a little bit as well. I would also like to point out to my viewers as well some of the CBW battlefield chemical weapons that were moved from Iraq before the war by the Russians into Syria are now not in Syria. They're in the hands of Hezbollah organization as well. The FBI have released the documents on this, and a senior American general has gone on record to confirm that point as well. So that's something else we all need to be very aware of, because hypothetically, if Hezbollah have got chemical battlefield weapons in Lebanon,
Yeah.
they can ship them anywhere in the world,
Yeah.
which is a bit of a point. I wanted to get my viewers aware of that now. Okay.
That's an interesting point. There was in January 2018, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. He gave an interview to a reporter of a Lebanese channel that's affiliated with Hezbollah, and basically, um, the assessment was that the interview was intended basically to strengthen the deterrent message against Israel by emphasizing that Hezbollah has military capabilities, high precision missiles, okay, and an Israeli site, the Miramit Intelligence Terrorism Information Center, they were saying that according to Nasrallah, the Israelis have said that these missiles could damage essential infrastructure facilities and cause a very serious disaster in Israel. So potentially, you can also aim those at Europe as well, and Iran certainly has missiles itself capable of reaching Europe.
You're
Um,
easily capable of
so
hitting.
yeah, and so the Israeli site that they noted, they said that creates a balance of terror between Hezbollah and Israel to deter Israel from starting a war with either Hezbollah or Iran. And then what's worrying now is that the Israeli General Intelligence Directorate, which is the intelligence directorate of the General Staff, they believe now that although there has been a kind of not a detente but a deterrent since the 2006 Lebanon war, which was very bloody between Israel and Hezbollah, that now the Hezbollah group are looking to direct small attacks and maybe even hold terrain inside Israel for 2 to 3 days and to inflict damage, but without causing enough provocation that Israel goes back into Lebanon.
Yeah.
So that's quite scary as well. And
Yeah.
if you add to that what we were discussing previously about the Biden administration being tested now by Iran, it's come in, it's uncertain. Is it going to be as hard on Iran and Hezbollah and as supportive as Israel as the Trump administration was? So these are all uncertainties. But when you've got the Israelis saying, that Hezbollah is looking now to be more provocative and potentially, engaging in a small-scale incursion, which could cause, quite a lot of loss of life in Israel, but without provoking an all-out war. I mean, that's quite unstable.
Yeah, the Hezbollah organization has got a track record of coming over the border into Israel, grabbing hostages and taking them back into the tunnels
Yeah.
in Lebanon. Can you explain to my viewers a bit of the history of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a tried and tested. I mean, it was a problem because when the Israelis withdrew from South Lebanon, yeah, when they withdrew from South Lebanon, abandoned their South Lebanese army allies, Hezbollah was basically able to move right up to the border, yeah, and now they're doing that in on the Syrian Israeli border as well, and like Hamas operating from Gaza. They use tunnels, they have infiltration methods that make it much harder for the Israelis to spot what they're doing, and it's a doctrine of Hezbollah to have sort of like small level commando units that can kind of infiltrate in by land, that can come in, that can attack sort of isolated Israeli outposts, farms, cause damage, maybe hold ground for several days, and then they're either wiped out probably by then. But
Yeah,
they can cause potentially a lot of problems, and they've done this. They've done this,
yeah,
and they're always they're sorry, they haven't like grabbed villages as such, but they've grabbed people, they've kidnapped Israelis. So it's a problem. It's a big problem.
big problem. So it looks as if the Israeli intelligence services are quite concerned about this happening again, there's obviously grounds for that concern at the moment over there. In the past 36 hours, there's actually been the Biden administration signed off their first airstrike against the proxies of Iran. And this
Yeah,
airstrike wasn't in Iraq, interestingly, it was in Syria.
yeah, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, just let me grab my notes on that. Yeah, so you had a 15th February rocket attack on Erbil, which is the capital of the Kurdistan region of Iraq. It's somewhere where I used to operate. I used to work out of there as well. Um, this was the fourth major rocket attack on coalition forces in Iraq since September 2020. Okay, it injured several, and it killed a non-American contractor.
Yeah,
But this is something that just didn't happen back in the day, back in 2010, 2011, and it's because after the September 2017 abortive Kurdish referendum and the offensive, which was basically Iraqi offensive, which was supported by Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force. Basically pushed the Kurds out of Kirkuk, and it pushed them right back into the territories that they'd had previously. So this basically put Iraqi Shia militias much closer to Erbil, the capital. So whereas before the major threat had been, like an IED, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices inside Erbil, now the threat is rocket attack from adjacent areas. Now the problem with this is that the Americans, people were waiting for Biden to react, and now they say, well, great, they've attacked an Iraqi militia operating Syria. But the question here is, will that deter Iran's proxies in Iraq? And will that deter Iran itself? Because these militias could turn around and go, well, actually, we can do what we want against American and coalition forces inside Iraq, and nobody's going to attack us in Iraq. They're going to attack somebody in Syria. So it's open to question. But what is interesting, though, about this is that the area that was targeted by the Americans was an important concentration for the Iran-backed Iraqi militias in Syria. And these have been struck repeatedly in Syria by Israel and also by the United States and other allies since 2018. But the area which was attacked was an area on the border, and also another area that was attacked was called the Imam Ali Base Complex, which is used to store Iranian rockets, drones, and military industrial equipment needed to make and maintain them. Now, the Israeli site Mir Amit, they very interestingly had another report just previously that said that the transfer by the IRG's Quds force of heavy weaponry that can alter the balance of power in the region was being carried out precisely along this area, which is the Abu Kamal border crossing, and this is being overseen by two members of the Quds force, that's the IRGC Quds force, under the command of this guy called Haji Ghaffari, who was also responsible for the attempted attack on Israel in August 2019, which utilized UAVs. So this Abu Kamal crossing was used to smuggle heavy and light weaponry in trucks, supplies, foods and goods, and these cross it on a monthly basis. And in addition, the intelligence sources that Mir Amit referenced, they pointed to another location several kilometers south of the Abu Kamal crossing, which was used by the Quds Force, which is again the Imam Ali base complex. So that's quite interesting. But what concerns me is the utility. Will this actually work to deter Iran and its militias? Because the rocket attack in Erbil, it was carried out by what's called a facade group, or rather, it was carried out by an Iraqi militia, but it was claimed by a facade group. So you've got two levels of plausible deniability from Iran. You've got it being carried out by a facade group, which is potentially doing it for, or which has done it for, an Iraqi militia, which is then also gives plausible deniability to Iran.
Yeah, I think the fact of, yeah, it's a spider web that Iran has been able to draw, for want of a better word, and
Yeah.
place over Iraq and parts of Kurdistan. I think my personal opinion is the airstrike took place in Syria, not Iraq, so it wouldn't upset the Iranians that much. But I think when we spoke earlier, I think we both have the opinion that that was the wrong thing to actually do, and that will embolden Hezbollah and it'll embolden the Iranians. If a message needed to be sent and a line drawn in the sand, that might not have been the best way of doing it. What's your opinion of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree because, sorry, can we just hold a sec? Just
Yep.
pause
So
a sec.
I'm just going to hit the
Sorry,
pause. Well, everybody, with a sort of slight technical issue there. Yeah, I was asking Frank about the airstrike, the American airstrike that went in against the Hezbollah battalions in Syria. So 7 500-pound bombs were dropped at multiple facilities along that border area in western Iraq, eastern Syria. Three trucks were also transporting heavy weapons at the time. They were also taken out in the airstrike. Frank, would you like to continue a little bit on this?
Yeah, I think the Americans have hit like a key transshipment point, but they've shied away from from killing a lot of personnel. Right, this isn't
Yeah.
like the killing of Soleimani in January 2000. Okay, was it January 2000?
No, I hope not.
Yeah, it was. It was January 2020. Sorry.
2020,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this isn't on the scale this isn't on the personal scale of sending a message of killing Soleimani. It's happened on 3rd of January 2020,
Yeah.
but it is significant in that the area targeted was the most important zone of concentration for Iran-backed Iraqi militias and also for Iranian kit moving across the border from Iraq to Syria. So that is significant. But ostensibly, it was the Erbil rocket attack was ostensibly carried out by Asaib al-Haq, but with a facade group claiming responsibility, so
Yeah.
that Asaib al-Haq, which is like a Hezbollah clone, so that Asaib al-Haq, which is controlled to a greater or lesser extent by Iran, can claim that it wasn't involved, and which in turn gives Iran even more plausible deniability. So then one has to ask the question, well, if you're not directly attacking Asaib al-Haq, because the guys who were attacked in Syria were apparently Kataib Hezbollah, another group, another Iranian-backed Iraqi Shia proxy. If you're not attacking Asaib al-Haq in Iraq, or even better, a senior Quds Force member, then the Iranians and the Shia militias are like to think, well, we can get away with attacking coalition personnel. We can get away with killing Americans. We can get away with killing their contractors. So I'm wondering what kind of deterrent effect it's really going to have. I mean, it's great that they've actually attacked that key crossing point is great, and the munitions store nearby. That's great.
Yeah.
I talked to, who shall remain nameless, a very multi-decade veteran of the American intelligence community, and he just came back and he said, he goes, I'm glad that we've hit that finally.
Yeah, well, that particular area has been it's been on the radar for a very long time. I don't think it's been a couple of months or a year. It's been on the radar for years. The market across the border in Al Qaim is a arms market, has been for many years. Camps Snake operational name for a terrorist training camp, was also just up from Al Qaim as well. So that entire area is a very well known smuggling route of Iranian arms that were coming through. It's also one of the routes that was used by the Russian special forces in the early days of the Iraq War to move the battlefield chemical weapons from Iraq into Syria. So this place has got a lot of history. So it was nice for a lot of us to actually see it get hit at last. Whether or
Yeah.
not it's going to close it down for a period of time, a short period of time, I think it will. But like all of the rat lines, at some point it will reopen again as well. Um, can you give us your
Sorry, but
opinion?
could I just add to
Yeah,
that? But before we go on, yeah, I think the problem with that is that once the kind of shock of this attack wears off, right? So they're going to look at the militias in Iran are going to look at that and go, okay, so the US were like restrained, but it took like an attack on a US base to do it, right?
yeah,
To launch this attack in Syria. So presumably they're going to be pushing the boundaries of the Biden administration again, okay? And then because if you've got militias that aren't Iraqi militias that aren't heavily involved in Syria, well, then they can push the boundaries even more because in Iraq against coalition and American forces, because they'll be thinking, well, what are the Americans going to do? They're going to hit Syria because they don't want to upset the Iraqi government, and they don't want to have a direct confrontation with Iran at this time. So it's open season. So that's the problems that I see.
yeah,
They might,
absolutely on that one. With Hezbollah as well, Hezbollah have been very operational in Afghanistan, working with the Akani network, helping to train members of the Akani network to attack coalition forces in
hmm
Afghanistan as well. So this isn't just Iraq now. We're on about an organization that has spread its wings out across the whole Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan as well. Some of the expertise within the Hezbollah organization is phenomenal. Their bomb making skills, their intelligence, counterintelligence, their organization has managed to get its tentacles out into a lot of countries throughout the
yep,
world, and the political landscape in Lebanon is dominated by members of government who are also members of the Hezbollah organization as well. I think people should be aware of that the Hezbollah has a political arm and they are very, very strong as well on that one. Um, what is your thought process, Frank, on potential flashpoints and what we could expect to see across the Middle East and Iran over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months?
okay. Well, what's interesting, I think you're going to continue to see sort of Iran and Iran-backed Houthi Iran-backed attacks on Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
Okay, because the whole rationale for the Houthis there, it's to continually bleed Saudi Arabia and its allies to kind of a Houthi-controlled um, Yemen, outflank Saudi. It also gives Iran access to the Houthi coastline. They can attack ships, and they have attacked ships off that coastline. It opens up, the area to the Bab el-Mandab Straits and potentially into the Red Sea as well. That whole, sort of area off the Horn of Africa as well. It basically opens it up to Iranian influence. You continue to see that. You'll continue to see probably Iranian seizure, harassment, and possibly attack on commercial vessels in the Gulf, like we've seen. Maybe even outside the Gulf, like along the near the or off the Yemeni coast. That's a
yeah,
possibility as well. Don't put anything past them there. I think you're definitely going to see continued attacks by Iran and proxies against US and coalition forces, whether it's from Baghdad or in the Kurdistan region. I picked up something interesting from an Israeli site, and it was actually saying it was quoting an Iranian website, and it's saying that it assessed that the rocket attack on Erbil airport was meant to also send a message to Turkey and the Kurdistan Democratic Party. That's the Kurdish family party, effectively, that runs Erbil and northern Iraq. So it was intended to send a message to Turkey and the KDP regarding Tehran's displeasure with their activity in northern Iraq and the growing ties between them. Okay, as well as a message to the United States about its own activities in the region. So I thought that was quite interesting. I think also you're going to see. Oh, sorry, I shook everything there. I think you're also going to see maybe this attack coming from Hezbollah, either from southern Lebanon against Israel or from the Golan Heights against Israel. I don't think it'll be kind of like a barrage of rockets yet, but it could very well be that infiltration that Israeli intelligence has been talking about. Something that really that causes kind of death and destruction to the Israelis on not a large scale, but enough to really disturb them, but without provoking the Israelis into a full-on intervention in Lebanon. Okay, and I think you're going to continue to see, the activity, so long as it goes on relatively unimpeded, of transport of, men, supply, materiel from Iran across its land bridge, across Iraq, across Syria, to sort of, supply and support Assad and also Hezbollah. So
Yeah, I
those are still going to, remain flashpoints. And I think the Israelis are going to be they're going to be looking very much the Biden administration. Is the Biden administration going to be as interventionist as the Trump administration was in the Middle East? Because paradoxically, while Trump was pulling out, was reducing American intervention in other parts of the globe, he was still very interventionist in the Middle East. Yeah, brokering a relationship between, for example, Israel and the UAE. And other Gulf Cooperation Council states against Iran.
yeah.
So I think it's going to be a more fragile and delicate time now as the Iranians test the new Biden administration. So you're likely to see more attacks and more probes of America's resolve than previously, until they get the measure of the new administration.
Administration. I think that's an important point. I think attacks are definitely going to come on coalition and American targets and Kurdish targets in particular as well. I think Iran and Hezbollah will up the ante. We hope we are wrong on this one, but from experience, we're actually not.
Yeah,
Um,
well, so Eric, I just put a point on that. I mean, people forget that, right? Following the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, Hezbollah began supporting anti-American forces right across the region, right? They had Unit 3800, which is a specialized branch of Hezbollah. They exclusively trained and supported Iraqi Shia militant groups attacking American forces, right? 3800 also supplied Shia militants with funds and weapons.
yeah,
Okay, so these groups, which were also, sort of like, Hezbollah was intimately involved in the operational planning of several attacks, including the 2007 attack on the Kabul Joint Coordination Center, which caused the death of 5 Americans. Um,
yeah,
so, they're still involved, and they were also involved later from 2014 on supporting the Iraqis against Islamic State. So Hezbollah are still heavily dug in there, dug in deeper than Alabama tick to this day.
yeah. I think that's what people have got to realize. Hezbollah isn't just a little organization, isn't just a name. It's starting and it has been a major player behind the scenes for a long time. Its relationship with Iran now is definitely coming. Everything's starting to come out from the shadows, for want of a better word, on that one. The rat lines, the pipelines from Iran through the Middle East to the Mediterranean as well. They are starting to, the spotlight's starting to come on there as well. The Iranians have had a lot of freedom, and Hezbollah has, to be able to move large quantities of weapons, people, arms, high value targets, explosives, not 100% free, but not far off it. I think those rat lines are going to become very prominent in the not too distant future as well. One of the things that I want to bring up as well is oil tankers. Iran has been harassing and
Yeah.
seizing oil tankers. This is very important because, from a strategic point of view, oil prices go up and down. If they go up considerably over a large amount of time, it affects Western economies dramatically. And that is a way that Iran has put pressure on Western countries in the past. I think we're going to see a lot of that again in the not too distant future. Can you explain to my viewers, Frank, a little bit about the problems with the oil tankers and that?
Yeah, I mean, it puts continual pressure. It puts continual pressure on anybody trading in the Gulf region. Which is everybody still is highly reliant on oil and gas around the world. Well, the Americans to a much lesser extent now, but the developed world is highly dependent upon what goes on in the Gulf, and the Iranians are just continually able to impose this kind of pressure. So recently, you saw it was a South Korean vessel, okay, and they grabbed that because they said the South Koreans owed them like billions, which of funds, okay, which had basically been denied under sanctions. So this whole problem, Iran is basically able to harass, the trade, and not just pushing up the potentially the price of oil, but also as well just it's increasing the military threat because okay, one day they're attacking a tanker, but the next day it could be potentially swarms of small IRGC boats attacking a Gulf Cooperation Council or American military vessel, a potentially a passenger vessel. There's all kinds of possibilities here. It doesn't just have to be oil tankers. For the moment, it's been oil tankers,
Yeah, yeah,
but
it's
also
definitely it's the whole thing seems to be expanding, and Hezbollah and Iran seem to be spending their technicals all over.
But
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, I mean, you've seen, sorry, off the coast of Yemen, which you described as
yeah,
well. I mean, you've seen a UAE vessel was hit by what was like some kind of remote control like vessel with a bomb aboard. So there's all these kind of possibilities as well. And then also as well, if you look at which I think is another model that they could follow, and which I would say this is like Frank's one to watch, is the same as the Hezbollah's amphibious unit in South Lebanon, which has like divers, attack divers, trained to infiltrate Israel and attack Israeli ports. But also as well, they have anti-ship missiles, right, which they can fire at Israeli vessels, which they can fire at offshore oil platforms. So that could be more of a model as well that you see, for example, in Yemen, the Houthis using anti-ship missiles, using divers to attack vessels.
yeah, there's definitely a lot more than what people generally know about what happens, which is why I wanted to do this particular interview, Frank, so we could
Yeah.
actually get a little bit of our experience and knowledge out there. So members of the public, members of the intelligence community, and members of the forces that are actually over there at the moment.
Hmm.
I hope this interview has been informative and helpful, for want of a better word. Um, Frank, as always, thank you so much for coming on the show again, mate. It's been emotional, as always. Would you like to say anything else before we close down?
No, I just had one last point, just about Hezbollah, the amphibious warfare unit. I mean, they are trained directly by the IRGC QF at a facility in Iran in underwater demolition, and sort of attack scenarios using divers. So that's just the last point I put in there.
Yeah, I
To
think
say thank you very much for having me on.
hey, no, Frank, it's great. It's nice to actually get a couple of few people together and actually being able to explain to people what is actually happening out in the Middle East, because whatever happens over there will affect us over in Western countries, especially with the production of oil and the Hezbollah organization as well. 99% of what of the work that is done in the shadows to keep the public safe. So on a need and all basis. I would like to point out though that no OPSEC has been broken whatsoever during this interview. No information has been put out there that shouldn't be. Everything we have spoken about, myself and Frank, is out there on public source information or documents that have been released by agencies or friendly governments. All we've done is put it together in such a way that it explains a lot of what is happening at the moment for the people who are not aware of it. On that bombshell, I'd like to say, Frank, as always, thank you. And to my viewers who have been watching the show, thank you for watching. As always, hope you've enjoyed it. Stay safe. Please stay tuned for a few adverts from our sponsors and supporters of veteran-owned companies across the United States and the United Kingdom. As always, everyone, stay safe. Catch you on the next show. Thank you very much.
If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David, they add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier.